Schwarzenegger. I'm creating this tutorial on screenwriting. It's a visual tutorial using the sequence method. This is to visually establish the workflow of working in sequences. So I'm in my favorite program called Pencil right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw little squares that represent each segment of film. The big deal here is that back in the old days, they used to use 10 to 15-minute reels to tell movies, and 8 of these stacked up would either be between 80 minutes and 120 minutes. And the idea is that within that 10-minute or 15-minute period, you would have a narrative function that would happen within the first allotted time. It's based on the audience's attention span. So the idea is that within the first 10 minutes or so, you would have to get their attention. And here we go to the tutorial. You'd have to establish the character. And usually when you do this, you would establish their situation, their location, who they are, a possible shortcoming of their personality. Maybe they're, and examples would be like Die Hard. They're setting up the story. They're setting up that the terrorists are going in there, that the husband is coming in. In the film Indiana Jones, we establish it's sort of a mini movie of the rest of the film. You establish that he's a archaeologist and he has certain shortcomings. He's afraid of snakes, and that plays out later on in the narrative. Fears. Also in Die Hard, they make John McClane not wear shoes, so it's establishing everything. And usually, what in the old time stories, what you do is you would start off just showing your character also in his day-to-day life, possibly. How before things became stabilized in his life, what it looked like beforehand. Also, there's a thing called the opening image. The opening image sometimes is just something striking to grab the audience. Um, in the eighth sequence, you can end with the same opening image to kind of give it a bookends kind of feel. But these sequences are marked from A to H, so there's 8 of them. So and the first two are the first act. So this is A, which is established, and then B, which is called the inciting incident. So some people have a problem with the inciting incident. And what that does is basically it's something that destabilizes the hero's world that we've established beforehand. Not everything's good anymore, and this is what brings the hero to action. The hero could be reluctant to be called to action. Also, in certain other formats, this is called the point of no return, where inexorably the main hero is being thrust into an unfolding plot. These are standard structures that are accepted throughout the Hollywood industry, so I'm just going to kind of go with them, so just bear with me. Also, what happens in the inciting incident is we establish what's called the dramatic need for the character. What that is it basically establishes what the character has to accomplish within that film. This would be when the terrorists come out in Die Hard. I mean, that would be an action version of it. And what happens is it's established that he has to save his wife and kill all the terrorists and save all the people. So before the credits roll, you want to make sure that all that stuff happens. Audience has the expectations, but you want it to happen in a way that the audience themselves were not aware of that would end up that way. The dramatic need is the first part of the story arc, and the idea is that this ends in another sequence. So we have our dramatic need. Indiana Jones, actually, it's a version of where, it's not so action-packed. It's just the men come out from the Secret Service or whatever it is, and they say that the Nazis are looking for, it's just they're sitting at a table talking about the arc. And that works really beautifully because it sets up sort of a foreshadowing of what's going to happen. Now, what the old-timers do is they actually say, you want to establish that story arc. So what you do is you scooch over, and you scooch over to sequence F. You forget about because your second act is there's 8 of these, so your first act is two sequences, your middle act is 4 sequences, and your last act, your third act, is 2 sequences as well. But what they do is they tell you to scoot all the way over to F. So A and B, and this was your story arc right here. This is the dramatic need, and this is when they solve that question that they have. He kills all the terrorists. they get the Ark, they destroy. Actually, they get caught in the Indiana Jones film. But in Star Wars, this would be like blowing up the Death Star, or Terminator destroying the Terminator, or in Aliens blowing up the spaceship. I'm gonna bring out examples for each one of these sequences, and this is G. I'm mean, sorry, excuse me. This is F, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. Okay, and this falls under the climax, and this is when that dramatic need is solved. Um, so what happens is you write through and you write your ending, so you know your ending, and then the next sequence is called falling action. It's funny because I have tons of examples of falling action. The idea is, say, like in the Terminator, they blow him up in the truck, and then you think he's dead, and then he comes out of the flames, and he's still alive, and they have to fight him. James Cameron is really popular about this because in the movie Alien or Aliens, he directed Aliens. Ridley Scott directed the first one, but both of those films they blow up. This is when they blow up the refinery in both films. And what happens is the alien stows away on board on both of those first two films, and she has to fight him again. That's the falling action. In Die Hard, though, it's not as pronunciated, I guess you'd say, in the respect that they just have there's one terrorist left, and he comes out and yells McLean, and then the guy shoots him, the policeman, and therefore like kind of vindicating him as a police officer and reinstating him because he killed the wrong person. Now he's killed the right person. But basically what you're doing is you're bringing them down from a heightened level of action. And then your H here is the resolution. This is where everything has either been solved and everything's back to normal. Again, in some films you can take the opening image and then you could use it as the closing image, and they could match. Again, these are just examples of situations that can happen. These are not hard and fast rules. These are just suggestions. So now once you have all this, the story arc established, you establish who the character is, what's destabilized him and changed his world, and then how he solves that question, and then the consequences of solving that action, bringing them down from the height in action, and then bringing them to the resolution and closing images. So what you do is you have, this actually falls under the second act right here. But then you go back in, and that's when you do your second act. Once you know your ending, then you can go in and write those sequences that happen in the middle. And the idea is you want to have, there's 4 of them. And what you want to do is have, so ABC, you start with the inciting incident. Usually what you do is you go with your initial solutions. The audience is watching, they say, oh, he's his parents are killed by the stormtroopers, or the uncle and aunt are killed. Therefore, he needs to go with his new friend and the robots and go to Alderaan. So this is our initial solutions. I'm going to bring up Star Wars because it's a very obvious choice because it's kind of wrought from this whole thing. So with that initial solution, you make them do the most obvious thing. And what happens is this is a way of roping the audience in so that they can, they say, well, why doesn't he just do this? And then the character does the most obvious thing they would do. And then what happens is that's when it fails. And this is dealing with the fallout. Actually, this is ABCD fallout from that previous decision. They're going to, and what you do is in this one, in this sequence, you actually have what's called a revelation, something that's revealed to the audience but isn't shown to the characters on screen. Again, I'm going to use Star Wars because it's a perfect example, but that's when the Death Star blows up Alderaan, and they're on the way to Alderaan. So what happens is, Ben Kenobi is training Luke, and he's going on about, learn to teach him the Force, and then he has that moment when Alderaan blows up, and in the Force he can feel that this thing is happening, and he has that moment where he says, "It's as if millions of voices cried out in terror with suddenly silence." We don't know what's going on, but again, it's a very beautiful overshadowing of what they're going. And see, we know as an audience that we've just seen Alderaan being blown up. So, and we know that they're racing toward that. So in a way, you have two really dynamic things happening at once. You've got foreshadowing, but then you've also got this whole tension. Like it's what they call in this method, they call that dramatic irony. And what happens is the audience knows something that the people on screen don't know, and that creates tension because now we know But now we wonder what's going to happen next. When they show up, Alderaan's going to be blown up. You know, what's going to happen there? So what happens is when they have the those initial solutions that fail, well, again, I'm going to use Star Wars as an example because it's very cookie cutter in this respect. That's when they go and they find out not only is Alderaan's destroyed, but there's a huge space station there, and they get caught. This is where the plot thickens right here. Plot thickens. And this is right when the audience is like, hey, those initial solutions failed. What are they going to do? How are they going to get out of it? So what happens is this sequence plays itself out with them getting caught into deeper problems, heightened level of tension. Again, this is like rising action here. So, and this one ends with what's called a midpoint reversal. Now, the midpoint reversal is right when the main character realizes that he's been coming at this problem the wrong way the entire time. This is, and again, what's happening is the audience's attention span is being taken into account with each one of these sequences. And this midpoint reversal can be shown in a lot of different movies. Like you talk about, perfect example would be Casablanca. In the middle of Casablanca, Humphrey Bogart's character, through the whole first half of the film, does not want to get involved at all with anything. He's trying to stay neutral. But then right at the end, right there, right there in the middle point is when he says, okay, now I'm going to actually turn and help the guy I helped him escape and the girl that he once was with before. And it's very, it's a noir, so it's a very complicated scenario. But in Star Wars, this plays out with them on the Death Star, and then they find out that the princess is on board. Up until this point, they're actually trying to escape, the Death Star. And what happens is now they have to go further in, and that even rises the level of tension even higher. So it's like, what do you mean we're trying to escape the Death Star? No, what do you mean we have to go deeper in? So again, creating a heightened level of tension. And then this sequence here is called preparation. Well, that's what I call it, actually. They have different sayings for different ways of describing it, but in this sequence, classically, the hero is now preparing because up until this point, he's been preparing things for the wrong ways and coming at things the wrong way. And then at this point, that midpoint, now he realizes this is the real way to do it. This is the actual solution to the ending. This is, everything up until this point, now that we know that this revelation, also talking about the revelation, is the recognition of that revelation. That's the payoff from setting things up on that thing before. And this is a good thing, revelations and recognitions. Again, this is a really great way to set up tension for the audience because they want to see what happens to the people. A really popular version of this would be like in a horror film when the killer's in the closet and he's in the closet, but the woman on screen does it, and you're sitting there biting your nails going, don't open the closet. And the filmmaker can actually tease with the audience, showing her possibly going towards the closet, something interrupting her. It's kind of like, Alfred Hitchcock talked about the poison in the glass and and they did this in the Indiana Jones where he's slowly going to eat the poison and then he comes back from it and then he pretends like you think he's going to eat it and he puts it down and then before he drinks it, that he finds out that it's poisonous, or he eats. I guess he's eating a date in that one. But the idea is that those kind of tools can be used to manipulate the level of suspense within the audience. Okay, so preparation. This sequence is actually sequence E is popularized by using new information comes forward or new helpers come forward. People that and this is where the hero or the people, the protagonists are given the full story. Like, hey, you've been coming at this entire problem the wrong way. So, and this can be kind of a slow moment in the script too, because the character sometimes goes through a moment of where, like, I can't believe I wasted all this time, and they go through this whole thing. In the film Star Wars, they get the princess, they're leaving the Death Star, and he has that moment of repose where he's thinking about Ben dying, but they could bum you out for the next 15 minutes, but nobody wants to see it, so they punch it up with this TIE fighter battle, and that creates a certain level of tension there. They do have the moment where he's like, he's depressed over the whole thing about losing Ben, but then they go off to the rebels, and again in this particular instance, information or new or help in the form of new friends. And again, in Star Wars, it's total cookie cutter because they go to, they get information from the droids about the Death Star. They what do you call it? And of course, the rebels come forward and become, they have a small army of planes stuff. Now, this particular thing is now we already know the ending. And the good thing about this is that we can write within that framework. We know how that ending is going to be because we've already figured out our story arc and the way that Falling Action is going to be. So in that way, we don't go off in all these different directions that the second act could pose for us. This is a problem with a lot of filmmakers. They'll get lost in their second act because they want to throw all this stuff in there. I always bring up the movie Prometheus, and one of the things about it is that they got lost in their second act, and they keep kind of adding these things on that, like an addendum outside of the arc. And what you want to do is you want to stay within that story arc. One of the examples I use is like, this guy's trying to get a car. Well, we know that he gets the car, and then maybe he has problem driving or whatever, Falling Action. But the idea is throughout these sequences, he could be getting, he could need money. Then he needs his license and then insurance. These could all be small films on steps of the installations of this arc. It falls within this. Larger media like Avatar: The Last Airbender, they had these very pronounced story arcs that way. He had to learn these things, and each one of the episodes was a standalone episode, similar to this in the respect that it was told in installations. But ultimately, what happens is, you're telling this one story with a bunch of little stories. So it's like the Russian doll, the babushka doll, the doll within inside the doll, and etc. But this way it was actually told to used to tell stories years ago. That I've heard it being used as far back as the 1800s, the late 1800s, and this was what all the popular filmmaking people from the 50s and the 30s and stuff like this. It was popularized again in the 60s, which ultimately ended up being shown in the 80s, but by a guy named Frank Daniels. But he revived that. But just another really interesting way to come at narrative. It's a really good. And the great thing about it is, if you don't have that second act, you can actually go back and reverse engineer. Well, here's the story arc. Here's what he wants to do. Right. This is what he's trying to do. And if you don't have these second acts in here, you can say, well, what would stop them? And in when varying degrees of stopping this person, how can you raise that level of tension by doing what's called it's called dramatic tension. And again, what's the greatest way of sabotaging somebody? Well, once you know what they're going to do, then you can intuitively find ways to sabotage them. I hope this tutorial was enlightening to some people. I've been using it on a lot of different things. It's just a really great way of ironing things out. I use 8, but you can sometimes you can actually go and take 2 of these things, and like the establishing and inciting incident could be just one sequence if you want to truncate it, or if you don't have a very pronounced falling action and you feel that you can get away with that. And again, this is an intuitive way to make films and stories. I mean, this doesn't just apply to film, so you could write a comic book or a novel. It's the perfect way to do it. But the idea is that these are giving you guesstimation points. It gives you a how to say it gives you options at significant milestones within your narrative, so that you can make an educated opinion. It's not a formula; it's a format. And it's just crazy that back in those days, that breaking the narrative up into these sequences actually did play itself out, and they reverse engineered a really great way to do things. Again, I hope this has been intuitive. Anything, if you have any questions, call me or email me and let me know what you think. And I love talking about this stuff, so feel free. Thank you. Bye.